WisconsinEye's coverage of Campaign 2014 is being brought to you by the Wisconsin Hospital Association. For over 90 years, a valued voice supporting Wisconsin hospitals in communities like yours.
WisconsinEye coverage of the 2014 campaigns continues. We're interviewing State Representative Jon Richards of Milwaukee. He's a Democratic candidate for Attorney General. And one note, WisconsinEye thanks the Wisconsin Hospital Association for helping make these interviews possible. Jon, welcome back to WisconsinEye.
Hi, Steve. Great to be with you again.
Why did you decide to, you've been in the Assembly a while, a veteran. Joint Finance, Assistant Leader. Why did you decide to go for AG?
Well, I think at this stage in Wisconsin's history, we need someone with some strength and experience in that office to help get us on track and restore the independence and professionalism to the Department of Justice and the Attorney General's office, and that's what I can bring to that position. I also bring a broad range of experience on a wide variety of issues, including public safety, the environment, civil rights, healthcare, and those are all things that are before the Attorney General's office, and I think we need to have someone who has some experience in all those areas to stand up for Wisconsin's families.
Well, working from your website and from your speech, let's talk about specific issues.
Sure.
I mean, you have called for background checks on all gun purchases. You told the NRA at the convention, quote, "I am not afraid of you." Why?
I think that it's important to stand for the right to hunt and fish and to honor the great Wisconsin traditions of hunting and fishing and outdoor sports. That's a great part of our life here. But I also think that we all should agree that we should keep guns out of the hands of criminals and do all we can to prevent felons from getting a gun, to prevent people who have a judicial order on their head saying they shouldn't have a gun from getting a gun, to prevent people who are seriously mentally ill from getting a gun. And that's the current law. We're just saying you need to obey the law. And right now there's a huge loophole in our law that allows people to buy a gun in a parking lot or out of the back of a car or at a gun show, and the person selling the gun has no idea at all who they are. And so I think most people in Wisconsin agree that we should have everyone obey the law that's currently on the books. So we want to close this loophole and help keep our community safe.
You and I have talked to Chief Flynn repeatedly, and especially in the wake of that tragic shooting of Sierra, 10 years old, playing at the Clark Street.
Right.
He's saying there's a loophole that the lead should close. What's that loophole, and do you support closing it?
Well, sure. That's the loophole we were just discussing.
Okay, I wonder if it was the same provision.
The people involved in that fight, remember, these are two people who had long criminal records who somehow got their hands on a gun and decided to have a shooting match on either side of a playground. And there was a 10-year-old girl who got in the middle of that and was seriously hurt. As a matter of fact, right now I understand we have 8 children in the hospital today at Children's Hospital in the ICU in Milwaukee suffering from gunshot wounds. And so that's something that I think we all have to be concerned about. And closing the gun show loophole won't solve all these problems, but it's an important step in the right direction. And if we know that violent people and people with long felony records are getting their hands on guns, we should do all we can to prevent that.
Has the concealed weapon law worked? Do you see any tweaks that are necessary in that, Representative?
Well, I think it's worked fairly well. I think there's some tweaks we should take a look at to make sure that we keep guns out of bars, for example. I think that would be a good step. But I also think that we need to make sure that if people file for a concealed weapons permit, that we process that promptly and get those permits back to people and make sure people can have a permit for their gun.
Jon, correct me if I'm wrong, but are you the only candidate who says that first offense drunken driving should be a crime?
No.
Who else is?
Ishmael Azan also says that.
Okay, but talk to me about why you believe that.
Well, I think there are a number of things we need to do to address drunk driving in our state, and we need to increase the use of ignition interlock devices. We need to do a better job of having mandatory jail terms for people who are involved with multiple degrees of OWI, 4th, 5th, 6th offense OWIs. I think it should be mandatory jail time for them. And part of that also, I believe, is criminalizing first offense drunk driving, and those are things that all those steps we should take to help address this terrible problem of drunk driving that we're facing in our state.
What's the price tag on that, Jon? You've been around finance. You know that is there a pretty sizable price tag if we criminalize first offense OWI?
But there's a price tag, and actually introduced a bill at the end of this session that would have paid for the price tag for that. It's approximately $12 million. And that is making sure that we can pay for the increased costs of court time, of prosecutor time, and of time in county jails that would come about as a result of this. And I believe it's important to move this forward, but I also think there are a number of other steps we should take too. I mean, making sure that we have enough funding for a decent drug and alcohol counseling. So if people go through a diversion program, we can get them treated and treat their underlying alcoholism, which is ultimately the way that we're going to stop them from driving drunk again.
How many states have drug courts now? Quite a few?
I think most states do, but I think
I'm sorry. How many counties? I misspoke. John,
many counties do, Steve. And
okay.
And what's exciting to see is that it's not only happening in larger counties, but even counties as small as Bayfield County. It's a population maybe 20,000 in far northern Wisconsin. They've embraced the idea of drug courts. Trempealeau County also, and this is something that's really taking hold in counties all across Wisconsin because people see that it works. We see that if you put people through a program and address their underlying addiction or mental illness or alcoholism, that can do a great job of keeping our community safe. It's not for everybody, and part of having these drug courts work effectively is making sure that we screen people properly to make sure they're good candidates for that kind of court. Eau Claire County is really a model for how they're doing that right, and the DA there, Gary King, who's endorsed my campaign, is really doing a fantastic job of studying the kind of people that are coming into Eau Claire County and their success rate, and they've been very successful in making sure that their crime rates go down and they turn people's lives around.
Some Wisconsin counties also have courts for veterans, don't they?
Yes, they do. Yes.
Do you support growing those?
I do. I mean, I point to Eau Claire County again. They have a veterans court that's working very well. And I think that's something that we should address, especially now when we have people coming back from Afghanistan and Iraq who do have some really profound issues sometimes, and we should be aware that a veteran who served our country really deserves some treatment if they get involved in the criminal justice system, and we should make sure that we have the resources in place to address that.
Let's talk about the role of Attorney General. J.B. Van Hollen, the incumbent who's retiring, has pretty much taken the position if it's a constitutional amendment, if it's a state law, the burden should be on the fact that it's legal. And so he chose to defend, the constitutional amendment on same-sex, the photo ID. What's your philosophy? Just because it's been passed and signed into law, does the Attorney General have a right to say, as the Attorney General, the state's chief legal advisor, I'm not going to defend that?
Well, I think your ultimate responsibility is to the Constitution of the state of Wisconsin, and the Constitution of the United States of America, and the people of Wisconsin. Having said that, I mean, it's important to note that Attorney General Van Hollen, our current Attorney General, chose not to defend the state's domestic partnership law. And I think so. Obviously, there is a question of interpretation here when you look at the laws that pass and whether or not they square with the Constitution.
Well, what about, what would you have done in the constitutional amendment on same-sex? Would you have not defended it?
I would not have defended it. I've been clear about that, because I think that provision in our state constitution and in our laws are laws that say that you can be thrown in jail if you get married in another state and come back here. I think those all violate the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution that require equal protection under the law. And most courts around the United States are agreeing with that position, including the most recent decision by Judge Crabb here in Wisconsin. But you look at courts in Virginia, Utah, Oklahoma, really around the country, people are seeing that those types of provisions really violate the United States Constitution.
If you were Attorney General now, then you would not be appealing Judge Crabb's?
Correct, I would not be.
Okay. What about the reapportionment? Would you have defended that plan adopted by the legislature, signed into law by the governor?
Well, that's something that we'd have to take a look at to see if it complied with the Voting Rights Act and, again, the provisions of the United States Constitution. One of the things that did come up was the whole issue of voter ID, and that was an issue that came up in front of another federal court this year that was struck down because there was a concern that it violated the United States Constitution and would disenfranchise nearly 300,000 Wisconsin voters. And so that's something that I would have some real difficulty with.
You mentioned in your speech the epidemic of heroin abuse. That is an issue of the month, if you will. I don't mean that it's not serious, because it really is, but what's the role of the Attorney General in fighting that, sir?
Well, I think there's a very important role. First of all, this is something that's going on in just about every county in Wisconsin and impacting families of all kinds all around the state of Wisconsin. And so we obviously have a big problem with heroin trafficking that's increasing in our state, with the number of people using heroin, and the crimes associated with heroin abuse that are really starting to rise all around Wisconsin. So the Attorney General's office, I think, has an important role in first and foremost making sure that we have effective prosecution against people who are trafficking heroin, that we get results back quickly from the state crime lab and the state hygiene lab when we need those results, and to close the lag time that we have on getting those results, which exists and is getting bigger.
The lag time is getting bigger?
Yes, it is.
That was an issue 5 or 6 years ago.
It is, and there was a time.
So the problem's growing, John?
Yeah, there was a time.
Excuse me for interrupting.
Oh no, there was a time when it was improving, and I give Attorney General Van Hollen credit for dealing with that. But I'm hearing from multiple people, from state troopers, from judges, from frontline law enforcement, that the lag time is now growing, and now sometimes it takes almost a year to get results back.
In a heroin case?
Well, in
just generally.
Right.
Excuse
right.
me.
But I do think that we need to make sure that there's a quick response to heroin cases in Wisconsin, because it is a very, very serious and deadly problem. We had the number of people dying from heroin overdoses is increasing almost tenfold from 10 years ago. And so it's something that is a major problem with affecting the lives of people in Wisconsin. But it's also an issue that people need to understand, that there's no such thing as a safe dose of heroin. One time you can have it and you're hooked. And it's a vicious addiction, and people have a very difficult time getting off of it. And it has ruined countless lives in Wisconsin. So it's something that we really need to address. We know that the heroin trafficking is coming in from the Twin Cities and Chicago, and there are some heroin highways that we know about that we need to do a better job of working with the Federal Drug Enforcement Administration and the U.S. Department of Justice to work together as a team collaboratively to stop that, and we need to increase our efforts.
Well, the Attorney General is calling a summit on heroin. You would do what? Summit plus what if you're Attorney General?
Well, summit resources, ask for more resources from the legislature, making sure that we have the manpower in place to address this problem. I think, there's a public information campaign out called the Fly Effect, for example.
Yes, that's on his website. That's on DOJ's website.
That's right. No, I think we need to increase and improve our efforts in educating people about the dangers of heroin use, and making sure that people understand that there's no such thing as a safe dose of heroin, and getting that message out loud and clear to people. And I think we need to do a better job of keeping track of that public information campaign and the results of that public information campaign. So I think there are a number of approaches we need to take to address heroin, and there are a number of people that we have to be involved with this too, and not law enforcement, obviously, first and foremost, and there has to be an aggressive law enforcement response, but there also has to be a response in from the medical community and from social workers and a whole range of other people who have a strong interest in keeping us safe and keeping people off of heroin.
Do we have that buy-in yet from all those groups that you just mentioned on this problem? Is there a recognition of the devastation, the toll that heroin abuse is taking?
Oh yes, I participated in a summit 2 weeks ago in Milwaukee, where we had exactly those type of people in the room, and there are people from law enforcement, police officers, prosecutors, but also people from the medical community were there. You had people who were social workers, people who were ministers who were there. People understand the severity and complexity of this problem, but also understand that we need to address it forcefully and in a coordinated way.
In his 8 years in office, one of the things that J.B. Van Hollen has been most proud of is the internet prosecution of child predators. Has his office done enough?
No. I mean, what we've seen recently is we've had a number of cases that have been reported into the Department of Justice from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. First we heard there were 3 cases that fell through the cracks. Now we've heard there are 43 cases, and maybe more. And what I've asked for is an independent investigation to come in and take a look at why so many cases are falling through the cracks, make sure that we have a chain of command in place that'll stop that from happening again, and take the steps that we need to take to monitor these cases as they come into Wisconsin, to make sure whether they're prosecuted by the Department of Justice or local law enforcement that we know exactly what's happening. We can never allow that to happen, where we have at least 43 cases or maybe more of these people who we know are in Wisconsin maybe preying on our kids. We need to get them off the street immediately when we find out.
Would you ask then for a lot more money for that for that division?
Mm-hmm. I think money's a part of it, but I also think a focus of the department needs to be more on addressing issues like internet sex predators, and a little less on some of these political issues like prosecuting people who are singing in the Capitol.
Well, you also said in your speech, we also need to prosecute white-collar criminals. Has there not been enough enforcement of that under JB?
I think there needs to be more, and we're living in a time when...
What type of cases has he not prosecuted, John?
Well, I think there are a number of... let me give you one example. I mean, we were involved in a nationwide lawsuit involving people in the foreclosure crisis. And, you know, people who we know came in and sold really questionable mortgage products to Wisconsin citizens. Many people lost their homes. And I'm glad that we participated in that lawsuit, but when we got the settlement from that lawsuit, there was a portion that was left up to the discretion of the Department of Justice as to how they were going to spend it. And spend it, instead of making sure that that went back to people who were harmed, unfortunately that went all into the general fund. And attorneys general in different parts of the country handled that very differently, and they made sure that the people who were hurt in that problem, in that crisis, got that money. And I think that's something that, an example of the difference of how I would approach that issue and how he's approached it.
The Attorney General, as you're well aware, has to ask for the governor's permission to hire to hire special prosecutors. Mm-hmm. Would you seek to change that law?
Well, I think that we need to make sure that we have strong accountability laws in place. And one of the things that I was concerned about was in this context of the John Doe investigation, where you had prosecutors for Democrats and Republicans looking into what was going on with the governor's campaign operation while he was Milwaukee County executive. And that was a pretty vigorous investigation. They went to the Attorney General asking him to lead it, and he declined. I think that was a mistake, and I would have accepted that, and I would have led that investigation.
Speaker Voss has said that the John Doe process may be broken, that they may look at changing it, because Speaker Voss's term, it's led to a witch hunt focusing on Governor Walker and conservative groups. Is the John Doe law broken?
No. You know, in the first stage of the John Doe proceedings, that resulted in 6 felony convictions for things as serious as soliciting children for sex with a public computer, to stealing money from veterans groups. Very, very serious crimes, and the people who were caught were punished and should have been punished. I think now is not the time to rein in this process that works very well to make sure that Wisconsin government is working at the highest ethical standards possible. That is the Wisconsin way and the Wisconsin tradition, to act according to the law and to make sure we have clean and open government.
One of the stats that always amazes me, and it's tragic, is Wisconsin locks up more African Americans, puts them in prison than any other state. Do you see that as an issue that's part of your job description as Attorney General?
Of course it is. And I think dealing with the racial disparity that we have in Wisconsin is something that definitely impacts us. You know, one of the things that I think we also have to talk about is that African Americans are much more likely to be victims of crime also. So I think ultimately we want to make sure that everybody in Wisconsin, no matter where they live, can live in a safe community and can walk down the street at night without fear of being robbed or hurt. I think that needs to be our primary goal. Having said that, I think there are a number of times when people are involved in the criminal justice system because of an underlying addiction or drug abuse, and I've been working with church groups in Milwaukee and around the state to increase the use of alternative treatment courts, and those have been proven to do a great job of treating these underlying problems that kind of wind up by default in the criminal justice system sometimes. And there's money that we can invest to expand these programs that we know keep our communities safe and really turn lives around. And that's where I think we should be investing our money, and investing that in those types of programs would be an important first step to addressing that very serious problem.
Would you set a goal that right now we have X number of our prison inmates are African Americans? Would you set a goal towards a lower number at the end of your first term? Or isn't it a numbers issue?
I don't think it's a numbers issue, but I do think
there appears to be institutional reasons why Wisconsin has the highest rate of incarcerating African Americans.
Sure.
I'm sorry, go ahead. I didn't give you a chance to finish.
No, look, I think it's the numbers I'm looking at are making sure that communities around Wisconsin are safe and making sure that crime's going down in some of our high crime neighborhoods around the state. And to make that's the number that I'm looking at. And I want to see some serious reduction in those crime rates. And because I want to, people living in any neighborhood in Wisconsin, 95% of people living there, I don't care where you go, those are good people who just want to live their lives in peace. And they should be free of crime. And that's our responsibility to make sure they live in a neighborhood that's free of crime. And so we need to take effective action to make sure that happens. And that's the kind of crime rate I want to see. One of the things that's worked very well is a program called Safe and Sound that was run by Barbara Notstein, who's a former representative, but she went on to run that program for many years. And they've done great work collaborating with police and with neighborhood associations to build up a network of information in neighborhoods that are deeply troubled. And they've been able to get more people to come forward as witnesses in crime cases and to inform the police about what's going on and see the police as a strong partner in keeping their community safe. And as a result of the work they've done in some of their target neighborhoods, they've seen a crime drop of 25%. That is the kind of result I want to see, and we should be making sure that we invest in those programs that get those kind of results to make sure that we see a reduction in crime and people can live in safety.
Should 12-year-olds be tried as adults?
Well, in this case, that was a tragic situation in Waukesha all the way around, and generally I would say no, but in this case there was a very unusual situation where you had a premeditated murder, and a murder that was in fact attempted to be carried out in a vicious, horrendous way. And in this case, I do agree that trying them as an adult is appropriate. Now, there are a number of other safeguards that are coming into play in the justice system that will deal with that issue, but that was a very serious premeditated crime.
Representative Fred Kessler, a member of your caucus, has said we got it wrong about 20 years ago. 17-year-olds should be charged not as adults. Do you agree?
I think that we should handle that in a careful way to make sure that 17-year-olds are able to carry out or are able to have sentences that are carried out, and that we address the costs that are associated with making that change. And I've talked to DAs around the state, and they share those concerns about making sure that if we change that law, that we do it right. And so I'm interested in pursuing that, but I want to make sure that we address those two issues first.
Let's circle back to your position that first offense OWI should be a crime. If it would cost $12 million, is that the Fiscal Bureau estimate? Should that come from GPR?
Yes.
That would be general.
Yes.
General aid. Many states have legalized medical marijuana for medicinal purposes. Your position?
Well, I think when you talk about medical marijuana, it's a very, very short distance from legalizing marijuana. And I think there are a number of states that are experimenting with different variations on that issue. I think Wisconsin should see what's going on there. I mean, we're in the first year of legalized marijuana in Colorado, and I believe Washington's the other state that has that.
But that's beyond the medical marijuana.
It is.
They're using they have legalized the social use of it. Excuse me for
but I do think that's a very short step between medical marijuana and full legalization, because what happens in states with medical marijuana is typically it's very easy to get a script from somebody, and you have marijuana shops all over the place, and it's pretty freely available. So I think that when we're talking about drugs in this campaign, Steve, the drug we should be focusing on is heroin, because we know that is something that is really relatively new here. It's killing our citizens, and that's where we should be focusing our attention.
So you have questions about legalizing
and that really is
medical marijuana?
One that I have questions about it, but ultimately that's a question for the legislature.
Is it too simple to say the role of Attorney General is, quote, top cop, close quote?
I think the job of Attorney General is to protect Wisconsin's families, and in all the dimensions of that phrase. I mean, I think when we're talking about protecting families, obviously we're talking about protecting people from crime, and that's I think that the vitally important part of the job. But also important, and another important part of the job is making sure that we protect people's pocketbooks and freedoms in our communities, and that means making sure that we maintain a clean and healthy environment, that people are safe from rip-offs and scams, and that people are held accountable if they try to rip off Wisconsin citizens, that we stand up for the rights of our citizens, for the rights for marriage equality, for rights for women's right to choose, for voting rights. Those are all an important part of the Attorney General's office.
At the Democratic Convention, all three of you candidates for Attorney General didn't attack each other, but your opponents made the point that they are now prosecutors and district attorneys. Are you at a disadvantage because you've been in the legislature and are not a DA?
Well, our campaign has gotten support from all 72 counties in Wisconsin, Steve, and we've been talking to people about how we should be moving forward with the Attorney General's office. And when we talk about protecting families and the range of experience that I bring into this position, people are liking the idea of having someone in the Attorney General's office with a broad range of experience. I should also point out that most of the Attorney Generals in the United States have not been prosecutors, including the Attorney General in Illinois and Iowa here in the Midwest. And so it's, I think when people around the country look at the job of Attorney General, they understand that the job of Attorney General has a pretty wide range of responsibilities, and people are looking at my background and seeing that I'm the best fit for that job.
On your website and in your speeches, you talk about your record on open and transparent government. Give me some examples.
Oh, sure. I mean, after Act 10, which dealt with the union law in Wisconsin, we had an issue about whether the legislature complied with the open meetings law. I don't believe it did, and there was an extensive lawsuit that went up to the state Supreme Court that eventually ruled that the legislature is exempt from the open meetings law. I don't agree with that. I think the legislature should be bound by the open meetings law, so we drafted a constitutional amendment to address that. And when you look at clean and open government in Wisconsin and every place else in America, I think we're living in a time when that is now more important than ever, because we have decisions like Citizens United and these other decisions that are giving an enormous amount of power to political groups that don't always have to disclose their activity, and they can influence the political process. And I think citizens need to have a chance to see what's going on in their government. I've been concerned to see that in 8 years in office, the current Attorney General has not brought a single action to enforce the open meetings law or open records law. I disagree with that, and we're going to make sure that law is enforced in Wisconsin. And
in your speech, you also mentioned Citizens United. You would back a federal constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United, because if I'm quoting from your speech, money is not speech, corporations are not people.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. I believe that, and I think that's consistent with a long-standing interpretation of the First Amendment of the United States.
Then finally, what differences between you and DA Happ and DA Ozan do you want to highlight, if any?
Well, sure. I mean, first of all, I have the broadest range of experience of anybody running in this race, being able to work with Democrats and Republicans to get things done on public safety, but also I'm the only one in this race, Democrat or Republican, who has experience in working on issues involving civil rights, on the environment, on health care, on a range of other issues that are coming before the Attorney General's office. And that's something that I bring to the job.
Thank you. Thank you very much. State Representative Jon Richards of Milwaukee is one of 3 candidates of the Democratic primary for Attorney General. The primary is August 12th. John, thanks for visiting Wisconsin.
You bet, Steve. Great to be with you today.
Thank you.